So, Trevor, this matchup between the Notre Dame offense and Georgia Tech is a very fascinating one because this is a much improved Georgia Tech defense. It's not an elite Georgia Tech defense by any stretch. It's a good Georgia Tech defense, but it's a pesky Georgia Tech defense. You know, you talk about the job that this coaching staff has done. You got to give them a lot of credit, because when you look at where Georgia Tech was defensively, let's go over some of the bigger categories, right? Of scoring defense and things like that. Last year, Georgia Tech's defense ranked 97th in the country in scoring defense at 29.5 points per game. Last year, they ranked 123rd, giving up 437 points or yards per game. They ranked 117th at 6.3 yards allowed per play. Their rush defense ranked 131st in the country last season. And then their pass defense was better simply because they were so bad at running. But they ranked 53rd in pass defense last season, but they ranked 88th in yards allowed per attempt. Because again, 75th in quarterback rating, the 53rd was due because people ran on them so much. They were a much different team. And then you fast forward this season, Trevor, and right now they rank 48th in points per game against a very quality schedule so far. They ranked 36th in the country in total defense, 24th in rushing defense, 44th in yards allowed per rush. They went from last year on defense, Trevor, they gave up, it was really a bad number, 5.4 yards per carry last season. This year, they've dropped that down to 3.6 already. Their pass defense still is an issue. They rank between 83rd and 104th in all those, so that hasn't been a strength of theirs. They're 28th in third down defense this season, and they're 59th in red zone defense. So you're going up against a Notre Dame offense that I don't know, like the Stanford game was great, but is it a one-off? You know, like you played a great first quarter against Louisville and a good finish against Louisville, but in between, not a lot of good stuff in there. You know what I mean? Stanford was great. Your first team dominated the whole game. Your backups came in, would have scored twice if they had another minute and a half left on the clock, you know, like they did against Purdue, and you rolled. Is that just, hey, we had a good game out of the break, or is that going to become the new norm, Trevor? That's going to really be the key, because this is you talk about what Notre Dame has to prove as a team. You talk about all the injuries on defense and all that type of stuff. You know, the best thing that you can do as a football team to help overcome the loss of Benjamin Morrison and Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patelho and Jason Onye and guys like that? Score a lot of points on offense, and don't let that defense be in those situations where they have to now make these big fourth quarter stops, right? Let them pin their ears back and go. So, hey, they've carried you for several seasons. Now it's time for you for a little bit to carry them and help them out. And the offense is going to be the key. And this is going to be a great test, because this is a Georgia Tech team that is not super talented, but they have good talent, not great talent, but they're well coached, they're aggressive, and they play hard. And that it reminds me a lot of the Northern Illinois game. Not a lot of great talent, but some veteran players that know how to play. They're well coached and they play hard. And here's the deal: they're not going to be afraid of you. They're not. So this is a great, great test for the Notre Dame offense. We're going to learn a lot about this Notre Dame offense on Saturday, Trevor.
Comes down to playing complementary football and the offense putting the defense, to your point, in a position where they don't have to make a stop and go 3 and out on every single drive. Right? Argument could be made that the last 2 games, Notre Dame's offense helped pick up Notre Dame's defense, which is a very refreshing thing. But I agree with you. Georgia Tech is not a defense from an athletic standpoint that's going to come in and just overwhelm you from that aspect. But what they do really well is they fly to the football. They're very aggressive coming downhill, and they play really hard, man. It's almost kind of like that chip on their shoulder where they know that they're not the most athletic defense in the world. So what they make up for it with their lack of athleticism is they make up for it by playing really, really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Well, like they've got that middle linebacker, Kyle Efford, right? And he's an old school throwback linebacker. He's 6'2", 230. He's a pure box player. But he's got the neck roll, and he's smart, and he's instinctive, and he makes great reads, and he flies downhill, and he smacks you in the mouth.
Yeah.
You know, they got a kid on the D tackle, kid named Jordan Vanderberg. Not a great athlete, but his motor is nuts. He plays hard. Romello Height's a pretty decent athlete off the edge. He's a kid that transferred in from USC. Kevin Harris, again, not an elite athlete, just a really good try-hard guy. Zeke Biggers is a talented kid, but he's been kind of disappointing to me this season. He's 6'6", 320, all the talent in the world. He hasn't produced yet. You need to make sure this isn't the game where the light goes on and he makes his NFL bones, you know what I mean, so to speak, by having that big game against Notre Dame. So it's a very intriguing team because no, I don't look at their team. I mean, their secondary's got some good athletes, but I'm not blown away by what I see on, from them in the secondary either. But man, they play hard. And Tyler Santucci, Notre Dame fans should remember him. He was at Notre Dame in 2017. This is the first year, I believe, since then that he hasn't been with Mike Elko. He was with Mike Elko at Wake Forest as well. He's definitely a Mike Elko disciple in how he attacks with that 4-2-5 look. Mixing up the looks up front. There'll be in some odd looks on some snaps. There'll be in some over-under looks on other snaps. Mix up their coverage. They'll show too high, roll to something different. They do a lot of combo coverages, 2 to the boundary, 4 to the field. They'll start looking like they're showing that same look. They'll roll to 3. They'll bring their safeties down. They'll blitz their linebackers. They'll blitz their – I'm watching the play against North Carolina where, quarterback drops back and he's looking left, and the left tackle's like, I don't know who to block. I got – an end crashing my face this way. I got a linebacker crashing this way, and then the safety's coming through that gap behind him. It's like, I don't know who to block right now. And you'll see that they'll call us 5-6 plays a game minimum against their opponents of that type of thing, where somebody just comes running through the line untouched because they don't quite know how to handle the twist and stunt. And Tyler Santucci's done a really nice job with that when I look at what they're doing defensively. And it's why a team that doesn't have – again, I don't want to make it seem like they got a bunch of stiffs out there. They don't. But they're not a team to me that's necessarily got way more talented this offseason with the portal kids and things like that. They got better coached. That's the big difference with this Georgia Tech team this year. They're much better coached, and they've bought in. They've bought into whatever Brent Key is selling and whatever Tyler Santucci's selling because they play hard. They're relentless. And even against Georgia Tech, when they fell, or against Louisville, when they fell behind, they just kept battling, and shut that Louisville run game down. I mean, they really did. And that's probably the area where I've seen the biggest growth from them, Trevor, is they have become a legitimately stingy run defense this season. And the Notre Dame offensive line is going to be tested because they're very big up front on their defense, but they play very, very hard. And this past weekend, they did give up a lot of yards to North Carolina, but North Carolina is a really good rushing team. And, they had a couple missed tackles here and there, but this is a North Carolina team that's, that on the season right now is averaging 198 yards per game. And for Georgia Tech and what they've done so far, Trevor, that was a bit of an anomaly. The most yards they'd allowed all season was 150. Syracuse only got 134. 4 of their first 6 opponents went for under 100 yards rushing. That includes Duke, and that also includes Louisville. They held Louisville to 57 rushing yards in that game, Trevor. And we saw that Louisville's got a quality ground attack and certainly ran the ball effectively on Notre Dame. And they shut it down. I mean, they flat out shut it down. I mean, you look at Duke, Trevor, they were coming off of a 185-yard performance against North Carolina, went for 74 against Georgia Tech. So for the second week in a row, you're facing a team that's got a really stingy run defense and a secondary that maybe you can take advantage of. Notre Dame's going to have to find a way to do that.
They're significantly more well-coached. They're a lot more technically sound football team on the defensive side for sure. Notre Dame, again, is going to have to find, I don't want to say creative ways, but it can't be one of those games where, again, you just sit there and consistently run into the teeth of the defense, right? This is a very, very, very stout defensive front for Georgia Tech. From a run game standpoint, they play aggressive, they play hard, and the offensive line is going to be put to test again, like you said. So going to be really interesting to see how the offensive line handles that again in back-to-back weeks, and arguably back-to-back weeks when you factor in the Louisville defensive front. So, yeah, I mean, Georgia Tech, they find ways to be disruptive in the backfield. They, like I said, they come downhill. They play really well in the box. So now on the flip side, the argument could be made that they haven't seen a backfield as talented as what Notre Dame's is, right?
Except maybe last weekend against North Carolina and Antonio Hampton, who went for over 200 on them.
Yeah.
Right? Because They don't have the depth there, but he's really good.
Yeah, he is.
He's really good.
He is. So going to be interested to see how Notre Dame's offensive line handles that, because this is a very much run, like stop the run first type of defense, which I think is why they are vulnerable so much in the pass game, because they will leave their corners kind of isolated a little bit to take away the run. So going to be interested to see what Denbrock does, the game plan around that, and how the offensive line plays.
And because they do so much movement in the second end, they're prone to blowing some coverages as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's factored into that mix a lot as well, because you are in year one in that defense.
Sure.
And there's still some learning processes going. And I think they've gotten a little bit better with their pass defense as well, Trevor. I mean, you know, they gave up a bunch of yards to Syracuse, and then Louisville had a lot of success beating them down the field. That's a really good Louisville receiving core. I don't know that we consider and say that Notre Dame's got a receiving core that can match what Louisville has. They haven't shown it this year anyway. You know, so can Notre Dame do that? But like Duke didn't throw the ball very effectively on them, 6.6 yards per attempt. North Carolina went for 6.4. Malik Murphy's a pretty talented kid, but still raw. And then, of course, North Carolina's playing with their backup quarterback. VMI went for 4.8. Georgia State went for 6.2. Florida State went for 7.1. And it wasn't until that last late drive with DJ Uiagalelei making a couple big throws, they were doing nothing in the pass game up until that point in time. So they've been very up and down. But the other thing, too, is like they held VMI to 92 yards. And they still rank where they rank in the pass defense. You know, so there's certainly areas where and the other thing, too, is they've given up 11 passing touchdowns this season and only picked off one pass. That was against Duke. You got to make sure that continues, because they're not a super disruptive secondary when it comes to, you know, to getting their hands on the football a ton. But you know, they've got 23 pass breakups on the season, Trevor, which is it's an okay number. It ranks them 35th in the country. Only one interception. So overall, they're not a super disruptive pass defense, and you've got to make sure that continues. And you're going to have to make sure you protect the football this weekend against them. But there's going to be some opportunities. But really, what this comes down to for me, Trevor, is first and foremost, this is going to be a huge game for the Notre Dame offensive line. Huge game for the Notre Dame offensive line, because of what we talked about. This is a defensive line that's got good size. Give you guys their depth chart, anticipated depth chart. Their starting ends, they're one of those oars. Josh Robinson is 6'6", 265. Sylvan Yunquin, I'm just guessing on how his name is pronounced, 6'4", 260. And on the other side, their rush ends are 240 and 245, Romello Height and Kevin Harris. And then up the middle, Zeke Biggers, their nose is 6'6", 320. His backup is 6'6", 315. They're starting three techniques. They have an oar, and both of these kids play a lot. Makia Scott, 6'4", 290, and he's a pretty stout kid when you see him on film. And then Jordan Vanderberg is a 6'3", 305-pound fire hydrant. I mean, so they've got good size, and like we said before, most of those guys play with great motors, and get after it. So this is going to be a big, big battle for the Notre Dame offensive line. They're going to have their hands full with this Georgia Tech defense. And then they're going to have to deal with the linebackers crashing downhill. Because again, we've seen this defensive system before. And against Texas A&M, Notre Dame was able to rip off some big plays, but they were very inefficient. That's going to be a big key in this game as well, is can you be more efficient when you're running the football against them? They weren't super efficient against Stanford either. If you go study the numbers, Notre Dame's starting offense only rushed for 115 yards in that game. A lot of their yards came in the second and the fourth quarter with the backups, you know, where Aeneas and Kedron and those guys kind of going off a little bit on them. Now, they averaged over 5 yards a carry because they didn't run a lot. They were like, I think, 23 carries for 115 yards is what I had them at numbers-wise. But they were just over 50% efficiency. It's not great, you know, and you know, you need to be a little bit better in that regard this week against this defense. Because if you can gash them a little bit and have some early down wins with your run game, it gets them in a lot of trouble. So, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. But this is a quality front seven, Trevor, and the Notre Dame offensive line is going to be tested. They're going to be tested in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of branching off from that, in addition, specifically talking around the run game, because their defensive line does a really good job of just relentlessly pursuing the football, to your point, with them having just almost feels like the Energizer Bunny with how relentless their motor is, right? I think the tight ends from a blocking standpoint are also going to hold a big key to Notre Dame's success in the run game, because similar to Texas A&M, when the tight ends performed well in their run fits, the offense was able to run the ball quite effectively. On Jeremiah Love's go-ahead touchdown at the end, Cooper Flanagan had a really good down block in the hole where Jeremiah Love sprung free. And on the plays where there were some missed blocking assignments from the tight end room, running game struggled a little bit. So with the size and how relentless their defensive line gets after the football, I think all encompassing, they're going to have to do a really good job up front for sure.
Now we talk about the secondary. We talked a lot about it. The question, however, Trevor, with everything we said, a lot of different coverage. When you roll a lot and you show a lot out of defense, especially in your first year, you can be prone to giving up big plays. Mm-hmm. I think you had the stats, Trevor. You want to read those off, the stats about their defense and the big plays.
Yeah.
Read that off. Now, keeping in mind the context is they have played one more game than a lot of teams, but that doesn't change this a whole lot. You don't go that low just because you have one more game played. But read those stats for the big plays.
So Georgia Tech ranks 107th in the country in passing plays of 20 yards or longer. They've given up 23 on the season. They rank 93rd in the country in 30-yard pass plays. They've given up 10, and they rank 89th in the country in 40 yards or more passing plays allowed. They've given up 5. So
now here's the rub. Notre Dame ranks 122nd in most passing plays of 20 yards or more. They rank 100th in most passing plays of 30 yards or more and 108th in passing plays of 40 yards or more. So Georgia Tech is going to come into this game and say, all right, we're not going to let you run the ball on us. And I think Georgia Tech is better equipped physically to shut Notre Dame's run game down if they want to commit enough resources to it. I don't think Stanford schemed well. They had some try-hard guys, but once Notre Dame, and we said this in the keys to it, if Notre Dame gets outside and they have no chance, and they had to cut back where he cut it back and bounce it outside and outran the defense. You had Jeremiah Love bouncing his outside zone for a big play. They ran some perimeter screens to attack, what was not a very athletic Stanford defense. I think Georgia Tech is better suited up front to do damage on the Notre Dame run game where they can basically force Notre Dame to throw the football in this game. And so, number one, the offensive line is going to have to counter that with a good performance. But can the Notre Dame wide receiver core step up and make plays? Now, look, they had good success last week. Stanford, I don't think, is as good in the secondary as Georgia Tech, talent-wise. Neither of them are really that good, but Georgia Tech, to me, gives me more problems than what Stanford does. They also can create more misses by some of the different coverage things that they do and bringing safeties down, and they can create hits on the quarterback and things like that. So they're not a team that's been great at getting after the quarterback. I think that hurts them a little bit. And that's partly, they're very good run defenders, but they're not great pass rushers. If you look at it and you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, well, first of all, if you look at sacks, because I know people like to look at sacks, Georgia Tech this season ranks they rank 104th in sacks. That's 9, but they've played more games. They're 113th in sacks per game. And when you look at and compare their numbers, for example, Trevor, according to Pro Football Focus, they have 72 pressures on the season, and they have 21 hits on the quarterback, either sacks plus hits in 7 games. Notre Dame, on the other hand, has 105 pressures in 1 fewer game. They've played 6. Georgia Tech has played 7. And they have 43 hits on the quarterback. 21 hits, 21 sacks, 22 hits is what they have. So those are things you look at, Trevor, and you say, okay, they're not great at getting pressure on the quarterback. They're not great in the secondary, but is Notre Dame good enough to make them pay for that? With the issues they have, if I'm Georgia Tech, I'm getting Romello Harris and Height and Kevin Harris matched up against Anthony Knapp all game long. I'm going to do some stuff out of my odd man fronts where I'm going to put one of those big D tackles on Anthony Knapp and power rush him right into the back of the quarterback. There's a lot of things where I'm going to go at the left side of the line, and it's naturally what Tyler Santucci already does. That concerns me. So can the line hold up? And even if it does, are these receivers here, are they good enough to exploit what has been a not very good secondary? They did it to a degree against Stanford, but let's be honest, they didn't light the world on fire throwing the football. Riley Leonard was on pace for about 300 yards. That's a pretty darn good day's performance. Can that be replicated, or was it a one-off? That's what we're going to find out. That's what we don't know, and that's going to be a huge part of this matchup, Trevor, is you're not good where they're not good. So which one carries the day? big week for for Riley Leonard in the pass catchers.
Yeah, this week, Mike Denbrock's going to have to do a really good job of scheming his players into space. Georgia Tech's defense has shown, once again, kind of like what we've harped on. And I don't want to make it sound like they're just a bunch of nobodies out there in defense that aren't athletic, but I am willing to err on the side that Notre Dame's wide receiving core has better athletes than what Stanford or than what Georgia Tech has as their linebacking core. They're guys that are very comfortable playing in the box. Louisville, and yes, I know that Notre Dame doesn't have a wide receiver on their team that replicates Ja'Cory Brooks, right? But Notre Dame needs to do a really good job this week of getting their playmakers into space, not necessarily just taking shot after shot downfield. I mean, Chris Bell ate up Louisville, Chris Bell ate up Georgia Tech on 2 crossing routes that were no more than 6 yards past the line of scrimmage. And one play went, I think, for like 50 and the other one went for 40, right? So it's plays like that when I mean getting your guys into space. This isn't a game where Riley Leonard has to drop back and throw 17 bombs against this defense, right? So
it's needed. You want a couple,
100%.
Because Shuck hit a couple bombs over top as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you are correct. It was
100%.
getting space.
Because on paper, and that this goes beyond the Louisville game, Georgia Tech's defenders give up big plays in one-on-one matchups, like from a high point the ball ability and things like that. So you will have to take some shots to keep the defense honest, just to make sure that they're not creeping up and every single player on their defense is playing within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. Keep them honest, but do a good job of scheming your guys open into space. So hopefully a lot of motion, things like that.
This is also going to be a very interesting week in regard to how Mike Denbrock uses his personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And how he formulates some opportunities to get his top playmakers in certain matchups. I'll just leave it at that. I'm very curious to see how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit about the Georgia Tech defense, Trevor. It is a very interesting group because you look at some of their numbers and you're like, that's just not good. Their pass pressure numbers are not good at all.
Mm-hmm.
Their pass defense is not good, but they've had some very good moments. Their run defense has been very good most of the year, coming off of a not very good performance against a big time back.
Sure.
By the way, but can Notre Dame? It really comes down to, is Notre Dame going to play like the team they should be, or the team that they've been for most of the season? That's really what it's going to come down to. If Notre Dame plays like the team they should be, then they should be able to score well over 30 points in this game. If they're not, then this could end up being a dogfight where it's who can make the biggest stop in the fourth quarter to win the game. I mean, that's what it comes down. I mean, it's simplified, but I really look at this particular part of this matchup as being Mike Denbrock and his staff's ability to find the holes in the Georgia Tech defense, put their players in position to be successful, and then hopefully Joe Rudolph can get his line ready to play. Because to me, that's the great that could be the great equalizer in this game, where Notre Dame has the perimeter advantage, they have the overall talent advantage, but there's enough there where we've seen some of those inconsistencies in the line to say, boy, you should have whooped that team, but you couldn't get anything going up front. And if that can't be the case Saturday against Georgia Tech, it just can't.
Yeah, 100%. Georgia Tech is a team that plays above what their rankings are on paper. I mean, that's a style of defense that they have. I take out Florida State's record. You're not going to convince me that on defense, Georgia Tech has better athletes than what Florida State had on offense. You're just not, right? So, but it's a testament to, one, the lackluster performance from Florida State. And I say that very lightly, but it also is a testament to how well Georgia Tech plays on defense as a cohesive unit. Because obviously on paper, Notre Dame has the speed advantage. They have the athletic advantage, but this Georgia Tech defense, man, they're stingy. They play really aggressive. So I'm going to be really interested to see, to your point, what Mike Denbrock does from a personnel standpoint, from a schematic standpoint, to get their offense going again from a different defense than what Stanford presented. So it's going to be interesting. It's a really intriguing matchup for sure.
What was the thing we said after the football game against Florida State and Georgia Tech? It was Georgia Tech beat Florida State up in the trenches.
Yeah.
Whooped their butt in the trenches. Notre Dame's got to make sure that doesn't happen. That's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Clemson did it, or Louisville did a great job. And I remember you breaking down that tight end screen that they ran. They did a great job in that game of getting their pass catchers into matchups that were favorable to them, calling some plays. They did some max pro to allow for the deep shots, and they got their guys in space, and that had a big role in the outcome of that game, Trevor. And that's something Notre Dame is going to have to be able to figure out if they can do. And if they can, then I like where this team is at. And if they can't, then this game could get a little bit interesting. I'm actually trying to look. I'm going to go back and see something here real quick because to back up your numbers about the Georgia Tech Louisville game, I want to find this real quick. Give me 1 second. I'm going to look up Louisville's pass chart against Georgia Tech because I thought that was very fascinating when I looked at it. So obviously Georgia Tech Louisville hit 2 bombs, to your point. They hit a 42-yard shot. That was that one ball to Ja'Cory Brooks, and then another 57-yard play. That was the pass to the right to Ja'Cory Brooks. And then in the intermediate 10 to 29, they had 3 completions for 39 yards. On the underneath stuff, 0 to 9 yards, they went 7 for 7 for 129 yards, to your point. So, I mean, think about that, right? That's a lot of damage after the catch. To have 129 yards on 7 completions on balls that were thrown 0 to 9 yards past the line of scrimmage, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of that after the catch stuff. So that was that nice blend that Louisville had of the deep shots with getting their guys the ball in space and letting them go to work. And Notre Dame's going to have to be able to figure out a way to do that if they're going to have a shot in this game. Or not, I shouldn't say a shot. If they're going to thrive the way that they should on offense in this game.
Sure. I mean, going back to your point about the Florida State-Georgia Tech game, Marcus Freeman has preached since he's gotten here that this is going to be a line-driven program, and now it's the opportunity to go out and show that that's the case because Georgia Tech has shown that they can eat you up on the offensive and the defensive line. So both lines have to come to play. And
this is game 4 of this new look line.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like, really 4.5 if you think about it, because they had all of Miami, all of Louisville, all of Stanford, and then half of the Purdue game because Strouth and Ashton Craig both got knocked out of that game. So now this will be game 4, full game of this group together, plus a bye. They had the whole bye week to work together as a group too. So there's no more, well, you're missing some guys. Okay, you're 5 weeks, basically 5 weeks into this new look offensive line.
Yeah.
They need to know how to do their job. And they showed improvement in pass pro, not just handling their job, but as I broke down in the show on Sunday night, they did a better job technically, not turning their shoulders as much and doing things to pick those things up. And that's got to continue now against Georgia Tech. So did you want to add something else before we move on to the defense, Trevor? It looked like you kind of had that. I got something else I want to say.
No, I mean, it was just more in agreement with you. I'm more willing to err on the side of the, give them some time to figuring out lineups on the defensive side of the ball because Rubio's back, Burnham's back. They've only really had 1 game under their belt this season. Burnham's had a couple more, but he was hurt for the bulk of it. But again, to your point, at some point, on the offensive line, they're going into their 4th start together. All of the, I guess you could say, quote unquote, excuses that the offensive line can have are starting to go away. Yes, Anthony Knapp is a true freshman, but he's going into his 7th game as a starter, right? So it's not enough anymore. Well, they've been switching lineups and Knapp is a true freshman. It's like, all right, at some point, you kind of have to start saying, this is the offensive line. It's time for them to roll. So.
Right. We're going to move to defense next, folks. Before we do, real quick, takes you 3 seconds. See that little thumbs up sign below here? Go ahead and hit that. Give us a like. You'll see a little thing, a couple spots to the right of it. It says share. Go ahead and share that with your friends and family. Share that, obviously, digitally, also with people, and help spread the word about what Irish Breakdown is doing on our shows.